You know that feeling when you want to really get something? To understand it deeply without spending hours buried in, well, dense research.
Yeah.
You crave those aha moments, right? Well, that's exactly what we're aiming for today. We're diving into some fascinating new findings about how kids learn to read.
hmm
And what we uncover might just surprise you about the best ways to actually help them.
That's right. We've got a really insightful piece of recent research here. It's an open access study from the Educational Psychology Review, published just last November.
Oh, so very recent then.
Very. The title is Modeling Interactions Between Multivariate Learner Characteristics and Interventions, a Person-Centered Approach. It sounds technical, I know.
Yeah, but yeah.
But what it really boils down to is a fresh way of looking at how different kids respond to different reading instruction.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
So instead of just looking at like one thing a student is good or maybe bad at when it comes to reading, this study looks at a whole mix of their skills at once. Like not just their vocabulary, but also how well they can sound out words and understand sentence structure.
Precisely. And the real mission here, you could say, is to figure out if this more complete picture of a student, their unique combination of reading strengths and weaknesses, gives us better clues about what kind of teaching will actually work best for them compared to the more traditional approach of focusing on one skill at a time.
Okay.
And the results really highlight how a personalized approach could be key.
So what is the traditional way researchers have usually gone about this, figuring out what works in reading instruction?
Well, the study mentions looking at one learner characteristic,
Like what?
like prior knowledge, for instance, and how different teaching methods interact with that. They cite the expertise reversal effect as an example.
Yeah, expertise reversal effect. Okay, can you
Yeah.
explain that and why it's sort of typical of this older approach?
Certainly. So the traditional method often isolates a single factor, like how much a student already knows about a topic.
Yeah.
And then it sees how different ways of teaching affect students with different levels of that prior knowledge. The expertise reversal effect shows us that beginners often benefit from really clear step-by-step instructions.
Right, makes sense.
But that same level of detail can actually overwhelm or maybe just slow down more experienced learners who already have a good foundation.
Gotcha.
Researchers typically use statistical methods like multiple regression to see how that one characteristic and the teaching method together predict how well students learn.
Right, like you wouldn't give a super detailed explanation of basic grammar to someone who's already writing novels. It'd be counterproductive.
Exactly.
But the study suggests there's a real problem with looking at things this way. What's the catch?
Well, think about what teachers do every day in the classroom. They see a student who might be really sharp, but I don't know, unmotivated, and another who tries incredibly hard but struggles with some of the basics. They're not just thinking about one thing, they're taking in a whole profile of that student, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The study talks about these potential combinations as aptitude complexes or trait complexes because these different abilities and tendencies, they probably influence each other in complex ways.
Okay, so it's like saying someone with maybe a strong vocabulary might be able to make sense of a text even if their decoding skills aren't perfect.
Exactly.
And maybe vice versa. But trying to statistically figure out how all those different factors interact with different teaching styles, well, that sounds incredibly complicated.
Oh, it is. That's a major limitation. When you try to model how multiple student characteristics interact with various teaching approaches, and even how those student characteristics might interact with each other in affecting learning, well, the statistical models become really hard to interpret.
I bet.
You end up needing massive amounts of data to get reliable results. And as the study points out, some of these relationships might not even be straightforward, linear.
Right.
There could be unexpected twists and turns in how these things work together, non-linear effects.
So if that traditional method has these pretty big drawbacks, what's the alternative that this study looks at? They call it the person-centered approach. What's the main idea there?
So instead of focusing on individual variables in isolation, the person-centered approach takes a step back and looks at the entire learner, their unique blend of characteristics.
The whole person.
The whole person. The specific statistical technique they used is called latent profile analysis. Think of it like this. The researchers used the data to find hidden groups, these profiles of students who have similar patterns of reading-related skills.
Latent profile analysis. So it's like sorting students into groups based on how similar they are across a bunch of different reading abilities.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. It uses statistical models to identify these underlying profiles of individuals who score similarly across a set of measured skills.
Okay.
And interestingly, this idea of finding hidden groups within data, it isn't actually new. The study mentions that the roots of this approach go way back to World War II.
Really? World War II?
Yeah, where it was used for things like figuring out the best fit for different roles in the military.
Wow. From wartime decisions to helping kids read, that's quite a journey.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do they actually apply this person-centered approach in this study, the reading one? It sounds like it involved a couple of steps.
Yes, there were two main stages. First, they used that latent profile analysis to identify those different groups or profiles of third-grade students.
Oh.
And this grouping was based on how the students performed on several key reading-related skills that the researchers measured.
And what exactly were those reading skills they looked at to create these profiles? What did they measure?
They focused on four important areas. First, decoding ability. They assessed that using a pseudo-word reading test as basically a way to see how well kids can sound out unfamiliar, made-up words.
Okay, nonsense words. Got it.
Second was syntactic comprehension, their understanding of how sentences are put together, the grammar. Third, vocabulary knowledge.
Standard vocabulary test.
Yeah. And finally, they also measured their initial reading comprehension right at the beginning of the school year.
It's interesting that they included that initial reading comprehension score in the mix when they were defining the different types of readers. Why did they decide to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. There were a few really good reasons, actually. For one, it let them account for where the students were starting out in their reading development.
Right, their baseline.
Exactly. Which naturally influences how much they might improve over the year. Also, by including it in the profile, they could capture any potential more complex relationships. Well, maybe a certain combination of decoding and language skills only leads to good reading comprehension if a student has a certain baseline level already.
Ah, I see. An interaction within the profile itself.
Sort of. And theoretically, it just makes sense to include the main thing you're interested in reading comprehension when you're trying to understand the different kinds of learners.
That makes sense. It's like trying to categorize different types of musicians. You'd probably want to know something about their current skill level, right?
Yeah.
Not just their theory knowledge and how well they play scales.
Good analogy, yeah.
So after they did all that analysis, crunching the numbers, how many distinct types or profiles of readers did they actually find?
The analysis revealed 4 distinct profiles of these third-grade readers.
4. Okay.
And what's really fascinating is how well these profiles lined up with the simple view of reading.
Yes, the simple view. We've touched on that before.
Which, yeah, is that key idea that reading comprehension basically comes from combining two things, being able to decode words and understanding language.
Decoding, sounding out words. Language comprehension, understanding meaning, sentences.
Got it. So what were these 4 profiles they discovered?
Okay, the first profile they identified was the poor readers. Now, these students tended to score low across, well, pretty much all the areas they looked at.
So low comprehension, low decoding.
Low syntactic comprehension, low vocabulary, all of it. And interestingly, they noted a higher proportion of students who were learning German as a second language in this group.
That makes intuitive sense. If you're still learning the language itself, it's likely going to affect all aspects of reading, right?
Seems plausible, yeah.
What about the next group?
Then there were the good readers. As you might expect, these students showed high performance in reading comprehension and also scored well above average in all the other skills.
Strong across the board.
Exactly.
No.
Strong decoding, good understanding of sentence structure, good vocabulary, everything looks solid. The profile we all hope for. Okay, what about the other 2? It sounds like those are where things might get more interesting, where you see some skills being stronger than others, kind of fitting that simple view idea more directly.
Exactly right. The third profile was the poor comprehenders. Now, this is a really interesting group. They actually had slightly above average reading comprehension scores initially,
Oh, okay.
and their decoding skills were strong, so they could read the words. However, they showed weaknesses in syntactic comprehension, understanding complex sentences, and had below average vocabulary. And again, just like the poor readers group, this group also had a higher proportion of students learning German as a second language.
So they can sound out the words pretty well, but they're struggling to grasp the meaning. Maybe because they don't know enough words, or they're tripping up on the grammar, the sentence structure.
That seems to be the picture, yes. It fits the poor comprehender label well.
Definitely. And the last profile.
The final group was the poor decoders. These students showed slightly below average reading comprehension and specifically struggled with decoding sounding out words.
Okay.
However, they seemed to compensate for this weakness with stronger syntactic comprehension and vocabulary knowledge.
Ah, so the opposite pattern almost. They understand language relatively well, but just have trouble actually reading the words off the page.
Precisely.
Okay, so 4 distinct types of readers, each with a different mix of strengths and weaknesses in those foundational reading skills. Now, the second part of this study, this is crucial, looked at how different teaching approaches affected these different groups, right?
Yes.
How did they figure out what teachers were actually focusing on in their classrooms?
Right. So throughout the school year, the teachers involved in the study filled out these online questionnaires every 3 weeks.
Every 3 weeks. Wow, that's quite frequent.
It is. And in these questionnaires, they reported on how much emphasis they were placing on different aspects of reading instruction. The study focused on 3 main areas teachers reported on.
Which were?
Direct vocabulary training, teaching more advanced reading abilities, things like understanding sentences and longer passages, and third, working on reading motivation.
Okay, vocabulary, advanced skills, motivation. And doing it every 3 weeks seems like a good way to get a sense of their, consistent teaching priorities, not just a one-off snapshot.
Yeah, and the study mentioned that these self-reports from the teachers were fairly consistent, reasonably stable throughout the year,
Right.
which suggests that teachers generally maintained a similar focus. So for their analysis, they basically looked at the average level of emphasis each teacher reported for these 3 areas across the entire school year.
All right, so we've got these 4 different types of readers defined by their skill patterns. And we have a way to see how much teachers focused on vocabulary, advanced skills, and motivation. Now, for the big question,
Right.
what did they find?
Mm-hmm.
What happened when they looked at how these different teaching focuses affected the reading growth of students in those different profiles? This is what we really want to know. What helps whom?
Exactly. This is the core of it. Let's start with vocabulary training. The study found that putting a strong emphasis on vocabulary instruction primarily benefited the good readers.
The ones who were already strong.
Yeah, the students were already strong across the board. However, and this is key, it did not significantly help the poor decoders or the poor comprehenders.
Really? Not the poor comprehenders.
No. And there was even some suggestion, although maybe not statistically super strong, that it might have actually hindered their progress slightly.
That is surprising. Because you'd think intuitively that poor comprehenders who we just established have weaker vocabularies
Right.
would be the ones to benefit most from direct vocabulary work.
That's a very logical assumption, isn't it? And it really highlights why this person-centered approach is so valuable. It suggests that for poor comprehenders, whose main challenge seems to be more around understanding language structures and sentence meaning, simply learning more individual words might not be the most effective use of instructional time. It might even, take away from focusing on the skills they really need to develop, like syntax.
Or maybe they can't apply the vocabulary if they can't decode well enough in the case of the poor decoders.
That could be part of it too, yeah. If you're struggling to even read the words on the page, having a larger vocabulary might not immediately translate into better reading comprehension.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it that way. What about the second focus, teaching those more advanced reading skills? Like understanding sentences, whole passages. Which group benefited most from that?
Okay, so this type of instruction focusing on advanced reading abilities primarily benefited the poor comprehenders.
Ah, that fits better with intuition.
It does align more with what you might expect based on the simple view, right? Directly addressing their specific weakness in comprehension, since they can already decode reasonably well. However, just like with vocabulary for the other groups, focusing on advanced reading abilities didn't significantly help the poor decoders.
Still struggling with the words themselves.
Presumably. And interestingly, it might have even been slightly detrimental for the good readers.
Detrimental for good readers. How could focusing on advanced skills hurt the kids who are already good?
Well, the researchers theorize that for students who are already strong comprehenders, Spending a lot of class time on explicitly teaching comprehension strategies might just be unnecessary.
Redundant.
Yeah, maybe even a bit tedious for them. It could potentially take away valuable time that could be spent on other activities that would further challenge and engage them.
Like,
Like exploring more complex texts, or maybe delving deeper into vocabulary but in context, not just isolated drills. Kind of that expertise reversal idea again.
fascinating. So it really, really seems like a one-size-fits-all approach to reading instruction just isn't going to cut it.
Doesn't look like it now.
Different types of readers clearly need different kinds of instructional focus. What about the third area they looked at, reading motivation? Did that have a different effect on the different groups? Any profile benefit more?
Interestingly, no. The study did not find any significant differences in the effectiveness of focusing on reading motivation across any of the four reader profiles.
Not at all.
It didn't seem to benefit one group significantly more than another, at least not in terms of their reading comprehension growth over that one school year.
Why might that be?
Well, the researchers suggest that the positive effects of increased reading motivation, like maybe students choosing to read more on their own outside of school, might take longer to show up in measurable gains in reading comprehension tests.
Okay, so it's not that motivation isn't important.
Oh, definitely not.
It just might not have an immediate differentiated impact on test scores in this time frame across these specific profiles. Fostering a love of reading is still probably crucial in the long run for everyone.
Absolutely. Long-term effects might be different.
Now, this study also did something else important. They compared these person-centered results to what they would have found if they had used that more traditional multiple regression approach, looking at one student characteristic at a time. What did that comparison show?
This is a really key point, actually. The study found that the traditional approach gave a different, and in some cases, potentially quite misleading picture.
How so?
For example, when they looked at vocabulary training using the traditional method, analyzing the effect of vocabulary level on growth, they might have seen just a general positive effect across the board.
Making you think it helps everyone.
Exactly. Without realizing that the benefit was really only concentrated in that one group, the good readers.
Ah,
Similarly, the traditional approach might have suggested a stronger link between, say, reading motivation and some of the initial reading skills than what the more nuanced, person-centered analysis actually revealed when looking at profiles.
so by looking at the whole student and these distinct profiles, they got a much clearer, more fine-grained understanding of who benefits from what kind of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the traditional approach might have smoothed over those important differences by sort of averaging the results across all students, hiding the variation.
Yeah, exactly. The person-centered approach allowed them to see the complex interplay of different skills within a learner and how that unique combination interacts with different instructional focuses. It provides much more targeted insights.
This really highlights how important it is to think about individual students as, well, complex learners with a whole range of abilities, rather than just focusing on a single skill in isolation. What are the big takeaways from this for how we should be thinking about reading instruction, say, in our schools and classrooms?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is the need to move towards more individualized, more personalized instruction.
Tailoring it.
Yeah, tailoring it. This research strongly suggests that adapting our teaching to match students' specific profiles of strengths and weaknesses can be significantly more effective than a generic one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
It emphasizes that simply targeting a perceived weakness based on a general model, like, okay, this student fits the poor comprehender box, so let's give them extra vocabulary work.
Which we just saw might not help them.
Exactly. That might not be the best strategy and could even be less helpful than perhaps leveraging their existing strengths, like their strong decoding skills in that example.
So instead of just seeing a student who struggles with comprehension and immediately thinking more vocabulary list, maybe teachers should be looking at the bigger picture.
That's the idea.
Are they strong decoders? Do they have a decent vocabulary already but struggle with complex sentences? And then tailor the instruction to address that specific profile, maybe focusing more on sentence structure or background knowledge for those poor comprehenders who can already decode well.
Precisely. It's really about understanding the specific combination of skills each student brings to the learning process and choosing interventions that match that profile.
Of course, as with any research, The study authors themselves mention some things to keep in mind
Yeah.
when interpreting these findings, right? Some limitations.
Oh, yes, absolutely. They were careful to point those out.
Hmm.
They noted that this was an exploratory study,
Yeah.
meaning these findings provide some really interesting initial insights, but they definitely need to be confirmed by further research, replicated.
Okay.
They also acknowledged that there's always a potential for bias when you rely on teachers' self-reports about their own instructional practices. People might not always report perfectly accurately.
Sure.
The number of students in that poor readers profile was also relatively small compared to the others, which makes it a bit harder to generalize findings specifically for that particular group.
Right. Less statistical power.
Exactly. And they also mentioned that their measures of language comprehension, while covering key areas like syntax and vocabulary, weren't exhaustive. There are other aspects to language comprehension.
Those are all important points to keep in mind. Research is always iterative, isn't it? It builds on itself. Did they suggest any specific directions for future studies that could build on this work?
Absolutely. They laid out several good paths forward. They definitely emphasized the need for more studies to confirm these initial findings in different contexts, maybe with different age groups.
Confirmatory studies.
Right. They also suggested that future research could use more experimental designs, like maybe randomized controlled trials,
The gold standard.
to get an even clearer sense of cause and effect between specific learner profiles and specific instructional approaches. They also proposed using classroom observations as another way to assess what teachers are actually doing.
Instead of just self-reports.
Exactly, which could provide a richer, maybe more objective picture alongside the teacher questionnaires.
Makes sense.
Expanding the range of student characteristics they look at when defining learner profiles was another suggestion. Maybe adding things like working memory or attention,
Mm-hmm.
and also looking at a wider variety of learning outcomes beyond just reading comprehension, maybe writing or spelling.
Yeah.
And finally, they talked about the potential for looking at how these learner profiles might actually change over time and how instruction could adapt dynamically to those changes. Kids aren't static.
That's a great point. So this study really feels like an exciting starting point, doesn't it? It opens up a lot of new avenues for understanding how we can better support young readers.
I think so, yes.
To really nail it down for our listeners, what's the most important single thing you'd want them to take away from this deep dive today?
I think the core message is that recognizing that there are different types of learners out there with distinct patterns of reading skills, and understanding that these different types of learners respond differently to various teaching methods.
Yeah.
That understanding has the potential to lead to much more effective and personalized educational experiences.
And for me, the big aha moment is really that while the simple view of reading gives us a helpful framework, decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension.
Yeah, it's a useful starting point.
This person-centered approach shows us that the unique combination or interaction of those skills within each student and how that student profile interacts with specific teaching focuses is really what matters most. It's more complex.
Exactly. It's not just about asking, is this student a good decoder, or do they have a strong vocabulary in isolation? It's about the whole picture of their reading abilities and how different instructional strategies resonate or don't with that individual profile.
This has been incredibly illuminating, really. It makes you think about how we approach learning in general, actually, not just reading. It makes you wonder, what are the different profiles of learners in subjects like math, maybe, or science? And how could our teaching be better tailored to those unique combinations of strengths and needs?
That's a fantastic question to consider, yeah. This idea of different learner profiles and how they might benefit from different approaches, it very likely extends beyond reading.
You think?
I do. Thinking about how students learn in other subjects through this kind of person-centered lens could lead to some really valuable insights, I believe.
Something to mull over. Now, if our listeners want to dig deeper into this specific research themselves, where can they find more information?
Yeah, absolutely. As we mentioned at the start, the full study is open access, which is great. It's in the Educational Psychology Review.
Right.
The title, again, is Modeling Interactions Between Multivariate Learner Characteristics and Interventions, a Person-Centered Approach, and it was published in November of 2023.
Got it.
And impressively, the researchers have also made their data and the computer code they used for their analysis publicly available.
Oh, wow. That's real transparency.
It is. It's a great resource for anyone who really wants to understand the nuts and bolts of the study, the methodology. We'll definitely include a link in the show notes.
Perfect.
We definitely encourage folks to take a look and, think about how these ideas might apply to their own understanding of learning and instruction, whether they're teachers, parents, or just interested learners themselves.